Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, where we're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me here on the screen, as always, both of us in blue today, Joe Clark. Joe, the Aaron Rodgers stuff, we keep promising people that we're not going to talk about it, but he keeps making himself the center of the news cycle by dragging his feet, and of course, that leads to everybody Steelers related getting asked about him, and there is an actual pertinent update about him, so we will talk about it today. Then we're going to move into a discussion on the draft and maybe some of the fringe positions that some people think the Steelers could be interested in the first round and kind of what we're hearing on those guys, those positions. And then finally, we will talk about some of the owners' meeting stuff, including the rule changes and what the Steelers voted for or maybe against in terms of the rule changes there. Joe, before we get into it, how are you doing today? Is your Final Four intact? How's the bracket looking? What's going on?
Yeah, kind of stupidly, I guess, I had Tennessee going to the Final Four, but other than that, I had the other three, which when I was making my bracket, I was annoyed because I thought there was too much chalk in there, but the four number one seeds this year are just head and shoulders above everybody else. They're like four of the top 10 best Ken Palm teams ever. So it should be fun this weekend because it's going to be some high level basketball.
I think I only have two teams remaining, but my champion is still in the mix there, Houston. So I think I can still maybe I might be mathematically eliminated, even though I'm the only guy with
I think
Houston.
I think you're the favorite right now because you're the only one who has Houston. So the odds are giving you, or I think you're the favorite right now to win. I have
I'll
to double
take it.
check, but
It's always that way, given that I look at college basketball not at all. So I'm sure there will be some hurt feelings if I end up winning. But all right, well, moving into our Steelers stuff. Aaron Rodgers, the big news, of course, is that he had a throwing session with DK Metcalf. Now, this is notable because, of course, Metcalf is on the Steelers. The decision's still waiting to be made. Rodgers likely weighing, okay, how much do I like this guy? But I think there was some kind of storylines taken out of proportion, like the fact that people were saying they traveled to do this with each other. That is not the case. DK Metcalf has a house in LA. Rodgers has a house in, what is it, Malibu or somewhere close by to LA. And Metcalf had actually been working out for several days at UCLA prior to this throwing session. And so not a super hard thing to arrange, but obviously still notable. And, you know, if you're Aaron Rodgers, of course you're looking at DK Metcalf and probably pretty impressed. He's worked with a lot of good receivers in his time, but, you know, not many receivers ever in the league, period, have been as physically impressive as DK Metcalf at, what, almost 6'4", running a 4.33 or something like that at the combine back in the day there. So by all reports, it went well. It was a positive throwing session. They both felt good about it, is what the word on the street is. And so another step in this Aaron Rodgers situation. And of course, that's only one half of the Steelers' impressive wide receiver tandem. If you're Aaron Rodgers, you're saying, wow, and they also have George Pickens. So hopefully this leads to a decision coming soon. But at the owners' meeting, Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, Art Rooney all spoke about this Aaron Rodgers situation and had slightly different things to say. Joe, if you want to take it away on that.
yeah. So both Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan both basically said there's really no deadline. Although Mike Tomlin did say that he wants to have a quarterback by training camp, he said that would be the line of demarcation in terms of that discussion. He's not too worried about, the spring because he said the spring's about teaching and learning. You bring in Aaron Rodgers, he's 41 years old. There's not a lot to be taught and learned outside of, getting acclimated with the new offense, which he can do during training camp. But Art Rooney II had a little bit of a different tune. He said the Steelers are willing to wait on Aaron Rodgers, but they're not going to wait forever. Um, he also said that they keep hearing that he's headed in our direction, and so he seemed to be positive about the team's pursuit. But uh, so it's just interesting to see where they're at with the timeline with this because I wrote an article on Sunday that they can't drag their feet and wait forever because if they do and they get into off-season workouts and the Minnesota Vikings don't like what they're seeing out of JJ McCarthy, Rodgers could be an option over there. So I think the Steelers kind of have to have a little bit more urgency with this thing. And Rooney kind of hinted that they kind of want things to be done soon. Ian Rappaport reported on the Insiders last night that several members of the Steelers organization have, privately said that they'd like a decision sooner rather than later, and that's kind of what Rooney hinted at. So while Khan and Tomlin publicly weren't, in any rush to, or weren't rushing Rodgers and didn't seem, impatient by any stretch, basically just said they don't have any imposed deadlines and they're gonna let the process play out. But it does seem as if that there's a little bit from inside the building that wants this wrapped up, relatively soon.
Yeah, here's what we do know. Art Rooney, his priority or his preference, he used both words, was to retain Fields or Wilson, one of their two quarterbacks from last season. And of course, the Steelers failed to do either of those things. Both are now on different teams under contract. And I think there's been reports that says Mike Tomlin's kind of the one driving this Rodgers situation. I can't remember. Was that Dulac? Somebody said that. That it's been Tomlin kind of driving the interest in Rodgers from the beginning. And so if you're Rooney, do you kind of, in that situation, you trust Tomlin? And I mean, Rooney even said, this has taken longer than I expected. And so I kind of get the vibe that, Rooney is starting to grow a little bit more impatient, maybe like you and I, and Tomlin and Khan are kind of, whether or not they're impatient, they're not showing it publicly. And so ultimately what matters in the end is what Rooney thinks. If he makes some executive decision, it is his decision to be made as the owner. And it sounds like there might be some other people, maybe within the ownership group or the front office or wherever it might be, that are kind of maybe leaning on his side as well. So if that force grows, then yeah, they could get maybe closer to placing some kind of ultimatum on Rodgers. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. I mean, my personal preference is get this thing done before the draft. I don't think it's going to impact their draft decisions either way, really. I mean, maybe slightly, I don't think they're going to draft a first-round quarterback either way. We're going to get into that in the next topic. But, maybe it changes their urgency from like a fifth rounder to a fourth, or a fourth to a third, or something potentially. And so I would just like for it to be done by then, get that out of the way, focus on the draft, stop having to talk about this every single episode, every single day, writing about it. That is my personal preference, but it seems like nobody really knows what's going on in terms of the timeline. So hopefully Rooney starts to place an ultimatum, because I don't really think Rodgers has too many other options. If the Steelers place an ultimatum, what's he going to do? He's not. Is he really going to roll the dice and hope that the Vikings come running to him in like 3 months from now? I think that's too big of a risk for him if he actually wants to play. Now, if he does have some inkling of maybe I'm like 20% in on retiring, then maybe he's like, okay, I will roll the dice because it's either Vikings or I'll just retire. Who knows? That's purely speculation. But I think an ultimatum would probably spur action. They're just trying to be respectful of the process. So hopefully that comes to a conclusion soon. All right, we've already spent enough time on Aaron Rodgers. I can't really promise that we won't talk about him next week, because it's just kind of worked out that way. Once a week, there's been a nice news drop on him. So I think we could probably expect that again in the upcoming 7 days. But moving on to the next topic, quarterbacks and running backs. Where are the Steelers going to draft them? I think kind of the consensus, I guess it's not a full consensus, but the overwhelming majority of people think that defensive line is going to be the direction that they go in the first round. I mean, even dating back to the Senior Bowl, dating back to the end of their season and how it ended with them getting run all over, dating back to the Senior Bowl with Mike Tomlin literally standing over the defensive line drills, some of the pre-draft visitors they've had so far, talking to prospects at the Combine and hearing about their formal Combine meetings with the Steelers, all signs have pointed to a defensive lineman. And of course, the free agency moves, which really kind of bargain bin shopping on the defensive line, do indicate that defensive line should be in the first round. But could the Steelers go with a quarterback? Could they go with a running back? Could they go with a receiver? I think all of these things are at least worth discussing to a certain degree. Let's start with quarterback. Jerry Dulac said he'd rule one out in the first round. Joe, where do you stand on that? Could you see in a world where maybe a Shedeur Sanders falls? I think it was some of the anonymous executives from Bob McGinn's Go Long Substack thing saying Shedeur, they might view him as a mid to late first round guy. They might view him even as a non-first round guy. If he happens to slide it to 21, do you take him? If Jackson Dart's there, do you take him? Jalen Milroe's entered the discussion. Give me what you're feeling on that.
I mean, I'm not really in favor of taking anybody in the first round. I mean, not taking him, not taking any quarterback in the first round. Um, I would, I guess you kind of have to consider it if Sanders slot just because, the overall consensus on him is pretty high and he's done some really good things. He also has, a lot of bad on tape. I think it wouldn't be bad if he took a year to sit and developed. But I think that's when you kind of maybe have to consider if he's there at 21. I would be shocked if he fell that far. I don't see it happening, but if he does, and in a world where he does, I think that's when you consider. I wouldn't take Jackson Dart at 21. I wouldn't take Jalen Milroe at 21. I'm just not in favor of taking a quarterback in this draft class late in the first round when it's already a weak draft class, even at the top of the draft. And I mean, it's not even Kenny Pickett 2.0 because you wouldn't even be taking the first quarterback in the draft because Cam Ward's probably going number one. It just feels like you're setting yourself up for a wasted pick of a quarterback that's not going to pan out if you take him in the first round. So I'm not personally in favor of it, although I do think if Sanders is there, it at least becomes a consideration.
Yeah, Sanders. I mean, I think it's narrowed down to three guys. If the Steelers were to pick a first-round quarterback, in my mind, that would be Dart, Milroe, or Sanders. Milroe, I don't really, really, Milroe and Dart, I don't view as first-round guys. Milroe, the only reason I say that is because Colin Cowherd, I guess he said he heard from an executive. Let me pull up the quote here. I talked to an NFL executive last night, very well connected, and this is a keep your head on a swivel, Aaron Rodgers. I'm told the Steelers really like Jalen Milroe, 21st pick, first round. So if Aaron signs with Pittsburgh, it's going to become Kirk Cousins. They're taking a quarterback. If the 21st pick, Milroe's not taken, Pittsburgh's leaning towards taking him. Yeah, so he's basically saying he's heard from an executive that the Steelers really like Milroe. I guess take that with a grain of salt. Executives, for example, on the Bob McGinn thing, weren't as high on Milroe. They kind of panned him a little bit, and I don't really think too many people are viewing him as a first-round pick other than this random report from Cowherd. So, he has traits. He has a big arm. He's a heck of an athlete. There's things that are attractive, but not in the first round, especially when you don't have a second round pick. If you miss on that first round, I mean, you're talking about like there's a good chance this whole draft class is just a wash if you miss in the first round on a quarterback, and then maybe the third round you're having to pick kind of from one of the defensive linemen there's going to be some good guys there, but not excellent guys, and then you're kind of pushing your running back need down. Next thing you see how this can kind of domino if they miss in the first round. And so that's why I really don't see that particular thing happening. Sanders is interesting to me. I think the Steelers obviously like pedigree and NFL bloodlines, and, he's poised. The Steelers are going to like that. There was some reports of him maybe not interviewing well with some of the pre-draft meetings. My only thing with him is the Steelers have had zero, to my knowledge, expressed interest in Sanders. And if they thought that he was going to fall to them, or if they liked him enough to where they at least were preparing for the possibility, you'd think they would at least have, had something. Now, we've only had 14 of the 30 pre-draft visitors reported so far, and so could he become one? Yes. But until then, I think it's not really worth talking too much more about until they actually show interest in him. Moving on to running back, this is an interesting one. Jerry Dulac said about a month ago that the running backs could be drafted high and potentially very high, and then he followed that up like a week ago saying that he was told that running back couldn't be ruled out of the first round as an option. That would mean, in my mind, maybe a Ashton Genty or a Omarion Hampton. Joe, are there any other names I'm missing there in the first round? Are you against that idea? Would you be open to it if it was the top guy kind of being there? What's your feeling on running back?
Yeah, I think if they do take a guy at 21, it's got to be Hampton or Genty. And I mean, Genty's gotten top 10 buzz. If he's there at 21, I mean, I think they consider it. Personally, I'm just not in favor of taking a first round running back, especially in this draft class. I mean, Genty's the top running back in a really strong draft class. I think he's going to be a very, very good player, and it's fun to think about if the Steelers' offense could actually be really good if they have George Pickens and DK Metcalf and Ashton Genty and Aaron Rodgers under center, and Genty can take some of the load off what he's going to have to do. But I mean, you can't. It doesn't matter how good your offense is if you can't stop the run and you can't play defense. And this is a team that just should have allowed 300 rushing yards in their playoff loss if it wasn't for the kneel down. And it's a strong defensive line class, and you have an addressed defensive line. I think it wouldn't be ideal, but the Steelers could go into the season, even if they don't draft a running back, which I fully expect they'll do in the middle rounds, but they could go into the season with Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell. And it wouldn't be a great backfield, but it would be a serviceable backfield. So I think you go into the season with a defensive line that Daniel Akawale is your starter and Isaiah Loudermilk's like one of your top backups, then you're gonna get gashed. So I really just think because of where they are right now at defensive line, they kind of have to take that, especially over running back. So that's where I'm at. I mean, Genty's really talented. Hampton's really talented. They're both gonna, probably be Pro Bowlers somewhere. But I just can't, especially without a second round pick. I just can't really stomach the idea of passing on defensive line to take running back when running back can be found. You can find a good running back in the third, fourth, fifth round.
Yeah, and so far they've had reported pre-draft meetings with DJ Giddens, Kansas State, Dylan Sampson, Tennessee, Bajal Tootin, Virginia Tech, Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State, Jaden Blue, Texas. So what? That's 5 running backs so far, and I think a kind of a wide range of projected rounds there. Like Facial Tootin, I think what you just wrote something about from the Go Long Bob McGinn thing, where some scout had him as the third running back on their board, and so he's kind of a speedster. I think he was the fastest running back of the group. What was he, like a 4.3?
4.32.
Yeah, very fast. He's smaller, but he runs with power. So he's not like a Chris Rainey or Dree Archer speedster kind of guy. He's got some legitimate power, and so a lot to like there. I think a lot of the guys they've looked at are kind of on the speedy end. Giddens, Sampson, Tootin, Blue, I think even. Ollie Gordon's kind of the outlier in the group so far as the big kind of 225, 230 pound back. Now, Gordon, I think we've talked about him a little bit before back during the Senior Bowl stuff. He's very, very productive 2 years ago. Last year he fell off a cliff, and he seems to have kind of put on some weight and didn't look all that great at the Senior Bowl to me. And his testing numbers, I don't think were outstanding, but they've always kind of favored a big body back there, so also wouldn't surprise me. But all that to say, I don't really see a first round guy being in their future. I don't know who that would be. But definitely with that third round pick, I mean, right now my kind of roadmap is D-line round 1, running back round 3. Of course, could things get interesting if the Steelers somehow trade up into the second round? Yeah, that could change everything. Who knows what direction they go there. Wide receiver, real quick before we move on. The only reason why wide receiver is kind of potentially in play to me is because Zach Azzani's been on the pro day trail so heavily. Typically, that means the Steelers are going to invest in the position early rather than later. They did just trade for DK Metcalf and gave up their second-round pick, and so you can kind of count that as acquiring a receiver, but that hasn't stopped them from scouting the wide receivers on the trail. Guys like, Trey Harris, and they've had in Jalen Knoll, Savion Williams, Jaden Higgins, a number of other guys that Azzani's kind of looked at or worked with throughout the pro day trail, and I'm assuming we're going to get some more receivers on that pre-draft visit list, and so they're most likely going to draft a receiver. Could one be in the third round? Joe, do you think that they would do that in the third round?
It wouldn't completely shock me. Like you said, given the guys that they've brought in and where Azzani's been, he was on the Big 12 Pro Day, so we saw the, Noel and Um, Savion Williams there, so it wouldn't completely shock me. I mean, I think they're probably more likely to wait until the later round, just because Mike Tomlin yesterday even said some really positive things about Roman Wilson, that they expect a lot of him. He threw some compliments at Calvin Austin the third in that same sentiment. So I think they're okay with what they have right now behind Pickens and Metcalf, but I do think they're going to get another guy in there at some point in the draft. And if it is the third round, I think, you're kind of just elevating the ceiling of the room. You're giving yourself, even a guy that can work by, because Pickens is more than likely gone after this year. So if you're looking at it from, more than just the 2025 lens, which they are and they should be, from the future lens, you take a guy maybe the third round. Maybe he doesn't play a ton this year, but you get somebody that can, take a big step in year two and kind of help fill the hole that they're going to have with Pickens gone. So I think that it would be, a decent move. I wouldn't really have an issue with it because it would be a solid longer term investment. Um, Especially if you take a defensive lineman in the first round and you don't have any, clear pressing, like you need to take somebody at this position to fill out the roster at the third. So I would think that's something they're at least considering.
Yeah, and like you said, talking about an eye on the future, Omar Khan said basically that the comp picks they're expected to get next year played a huge role in their decision making process or influenced their decision making process for this year's free agency. I think I talked about that a little bit on last week's episode, and so it was good to hear him kind of confirming that. I mean, we kind of just looking at the moves, you could see that was true, but hearing that is a different thing. I think a lot of Steelers fans just assume, the Steelers are always angling for what's best this season. I think that a strong argument can be made that his basically them angling their stuff around the comp picks is doing the opposite of that. Is they could have signed a Milton Williams for a ton of money, but then that would have erased a third round pick next year from the compensatory value of Dan Moore Jr. And so, they are kind of tipping the scales towards, okay, they do want to be competitive this year. That's why they signed Darius Slay for, $10 million or whatever it was. That's why they, made some of the moves they did. DK Metcalf, obviously the big one. They want to compete. They always are going to want to compete, but that doesn't mean that you can't kind of keep an eye on the future. And I think that's what they're doing here. So good to hear that. And yeah, I think the idea of getting a receiver in place is probably a good idea. I'm almost somewhat in favor of doing that in the third round just because there are so many running backs in this class. You can get one in the fourth or fifth round. And if you get a receiver, you're setting up your potentially first round draft pick next year at quarterback with, stable weapons. You've got, at that point, 3 more years of a rookie contract for whoever you draft this year, along with DK Metcalf, along with Roman Wilson for, I guess, what would be 2 more years by the time they draft a quarterback. And so that would be a good amount of stability for a quarterback to step into, along with this young offensive line. Hopefully he's gelled by then. It could be a good kind of setup for a future quarterback. And so that's the reason why I think a receiver could be in play. Moving on to our third topic, the rule changes. A lot of what we've been talking about has been coming out of the owners' meetings taking place in West Palm in Florida there. And one of the big kind of overarching NFL storylines has been the rule changes that have taken place, or the lack of some of the rule changes that maybe were voted on but didn't quite pass. I don't know exactly. Is it a 2/3 majority that needs to pass a rule, or they need to reach some kind of...
I think it's what 20. They need 23 votes, so I think that would be 2/3, or it's either 23 or 24.
Okay, so yeah, basically, I don't know the exact number, but it sounds about 2/3. Tush push was struck down in terms of it will remain in the game for now, although it could be voted on later in the off season. I think it. How many votes did they get to? 18 or?
I think I read they never took it. They 16. There was a report, I think, by Mike Florio that 16 owners were in favor of a ban, but they never actually voted on it. They said they went into the room and Rich McKay, who's the head of the competition committee, basically just asked, like, do you want to vote on this or should we table it? We need more time. And I think there's a consensus just to table it. I think it'll get brought back up to potentially vote on in like May, but yeah, the Steelers did want to ban it.
Yeah, Art Rooney said today in a video that was posted just minutes before we hopped on this show that yeah, they were in favor of banning it. Now, it was a very limited language that only bans the support of a quarterback in those short yardage kind of quarterback sneaks, pushing them from behind. From the sound of it, actually, Rooney, I think, stated in that video, people were talking about, oh, well, if you ban that, then why aren't we paying attention to people assisting runners down the field and stuff like that, which I think is kind of a, I don't know. I think that's a kind of a poor argument probably made by people who are in favor of the tush push or benefit from the tush push. I mean, it's way different to have, some, I don't know, like a Calvin Austin III assisting a runner down the field as opposed to, 3 or 4 big linemen kind of pushing a rugby scrum. But I can get why they would throw that argument out there, I guess. But yeah, all that to say, for now, tush push is still around. Maybe they'll vote on it later. It sounded like it didn't have enough support. Sounds like player safety is kind of what is the domino that needs to fall. And so I don't think anything's probably going to happen with that play unless some kind of report is published that states, hey, there's been this many injuries and, what is it, a 25, 30% chance of injury increase or something like that. If that happens, then I think they will ban it. But until then, it kind of seems like coaches coaches, whoever's voting on the committee is leaning towards keeping it. So I guess we'll see how that ends. The other thing, they voted against, not the Steelers, but just in general, voted against the divisionless playoff seeding. Actually, the Steelers did vote against that, Art Rooney said. So that was basically like a rule for the NFC North this past year. For example, they had, 3 teams that could have been basically at the top of the conference, and instead some of them were kind of down there in the wild card. So this was a vote to try and get rid of that and make sure that teams with the best records are atop the standings, kind of hurting the emphasis placed on division play and division seeding and all of that. And so the Steelers, obviously the AFC North is kind of known for great battles, and they want to keep that intact. And so they voted against that rule. That rule was struck down, so nothing changing there. Let's see. The Steelers' rule proposal passed with altered language. Joe, I think you wrote about that if you want to give a quick synopsis there.
Yeah, so the Steelers' rule proposal is basically just to allow a Zoom call with players during the legal tampering period, and then once terms are agreed to be able to book travel to get them into whatever city they sign with to sign their contract after at the start of the new league year, but they're now able to book travel beforehand. So it passed with you get to meet with 5 prospects. So that was an amendment. And this next offseason it'll be on a 1-year trial basis starting next offseason. So if it goes well, maybe they'll keep it, maybe they'll modify it. And if it doesn't, then they'll just go back to the archaic kind of rules they have where you're allowed to agree to terms with players, but you're not allowed to meet with them or directly, or you can't book travel until the new league year, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but so I'm assuming that this is probably going to be here to stay beyond just the 1-year trial period.
Yeah, it seems like who was it that called it a very good idea? It was
John Schneider, the Seahawks GM.
That's right. So it seems like, it's just modernizing the process. The altered language allows you to meet with 5 people, and so they're kind of dipping their toes in this water. I guess we'll see if there's any unintended consequences. I can't really think of any. It will be kind of interesting now to count, though. We know that there's a 5-person limit next year, so if some get reported, we're going to probably get into the world of tracking those. And I think one unintended consequence is that these things will go reported more, and so you won't have situations where all of a sudden a player signs. You're going to hear about these meetings probably a little bit ahead of time, and so it might actually increase activity for the media during this time and just kind of visibility into the process. So that might be good. Generating more buzz for the NFL. That might be a kind of a positive unintended consequence of modernizing this system. The kickoff change, the actual rule change from last year is here to stay, but they are tweaking part of it to where the touchback, instead of going from up to the 30, is now up to the 35. So a lot of teams were opting to basically forego the rule altogether and just kick it through the back of the end zone for a touchback. But that is basically being discouraged now by bumping that touchback up to the 35-yard line. Art Rooney said that he was kind of unsure about that change and whether or not he liked it, but they're going to try it out this year. I think Cordell Patterson said he wasn't a fan, that the rule was here to stay. Maybe he will be more of a fan now that the kickoff returns are going to be more prevalent, I would guess. We'll see. I mean, Joe, do you think teams are going to continue just settling for the touchback, or do you think, to what extent do you think this is going to change the calculus there?
I mean, I think you might. I would assume that teams would try to at least kick it and play. 35-yard line is not you know just any. It's very easy to get into opposing territory. It's 15 yards to midfield, so I would think teams would try to limit getting it out to the 35 if possible. But it'll be interesting to see how they decide to play that.
Yeah, I think overall the rule was kind of a failure in my eyes last year, so hopefully this does improve the excitement of it. I think they proved that the player safety aspect of it was solved, and so now they're trying to kind of move the parameters up to make it more exciting. I think that's probably a good thing, but we will see. I think probably Kenneth Gainwell will be in the mix for that. I don't know if Patterson will still be around. It's kind of puzzling to me that he's still on the roster. I guess we'll see what happens there, but Kenneth Gainwell, kind of a similar skill set to Patterson in terms of he can return kicks. He can kind of be that third guy in the running back room. He's good at receiving. I think a lot of similarities or overlaps in their skill set, and Gainwell's obviously going to make the roster at this point, I would think. I mean, you wouldn't sign him to that unless... I mean, I guess it's not a lock given his contract, but it would be surprising if he didn't, to me. Okay, I think that's everything from our topics. We do have a question from a listener. If you want your question answered, you can call or text 412-254-3145. Leave us your name, where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. This one is from Brett from San Angelo, Texas.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo. My question to you is, do you perhaps think that Rodgers' reluctance to sign or inability to make up his mind might have something to do with the Steelers' stated approach to their tackle position this year, which nominally is to have two guys with combined two snaps from last year at the positions they'll be expected to play, one of which, Fautano, won't have played that position since high school, and Jones hasn't played it in a couple of years. Do you think that could be influencing his decision to consider retirement, especially after the pounding he took last year on several big hits from the Jets? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, question about the tackles kind of being one of the reasons why Aaron Rodgers might be dragging his feet. I don't think that would be the significant factor, though I'm sure he has thought about it. I think I posted a while back a look at the Pro Football Focus, and I know take those with a grain of salt, but the Pro Football Focus pass protection or pass blocking grades from last year, and the Giants and the Steelers were both near the bottom of the league, and so when he was making his decision, I was joking that he'd probably just decide to retire if he saw that list. Now, I don't think it probably... I mean, if he had like a bunch of options, then maybe that could be factoring in, but he doesn't have options, so I don't think he's... I personally don't think retirement's on the table. I don't think a competitor like that's going out like a buster on a 5-win record with the Jets. And people close to him, like AJ Hawk on the Pat McAfee show, have kind of said that he'd be surprised if Rodgers retires. I think Schefter's now said that it would be surprising if he retires. And so I get where you're coming from. I think the tackle situation is concerning for any quarterback, but you also look at it from his perspective and say, okay, well, they've invested 4 pretty high draft picks over the last couple of years. They're young. They should be improving. Guys like Fautanu, he might not have experience, but the team was high on him. Broderick Jones is kind of the biggest question mark to me, but no, I don't think this would probably influence him. in a big way. Joe, do you agree?
Yeah, everything you just said, completely agree.
All right, well, not much to add to that there, but thank you for the question, Brett. And I did want to acknowledge we had a text question from a Mark. Let's see. Mark, I don't want to answer this right now just because I admittedly need to do a little bit of research to answer your question. Mark from North Carolina, 63 years old, retired wildland fighter. Merle Haggard driver / roadie, Coast Guard veteran. Wow, you've lived a life there, Mark. So thank you for writing in. His question's about a quarterback that I don't know a ton about. DJ, I'm gonna try and say this name, Wigalele. I don't know a ton about him. I'm gonna be honest, so I don't want to just speak on that. But I promise you that I will do a little bit of research before next episode, Mark, and I will give you some thoughts on him. It seems like you have a well thought out overview of that player and why he might make sense as a late round flyer. And so I am now intrigued of learning more about him. So thank you, Mark, and we will get to your question next week. If you want to have a question answered on the show, 412-254-3145, give us a call, give us a text, and we will get to your question on a future episode. Like always, I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.